Welcome to Tales by Imon, where stories unfold from the corners of forgotten towns. Today, we begin a journey into the mysterious world of Solitude, a town where nothing is as it seems, and no one leaves. This is the first chapter of our tale. Prepare yourself for the strange and eerie secrets that linger in the shadows. It was a cool autumn evening when the car rolled into Solitude. The trees lining the road swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves whispering stories only the wind could understand. The car's headlights pierced through the fog that hung thick in the air, casting long shadows over the deserted streets. A man sat behind the wheel, his brow furrowed in concentration. His name was Michael Harper, a man in his mid-30s, with dark brown hair and a sense of restlessness that had followed him for as long as he could remember. Michael had never heard of Solitude until the day he received the letter. A simple, handwritten note, the kind that looked like it belonged in another time, another place. The envelope was old, the paper yellowed with age, and the ink smudged in parts as if the person who wrote it had been in a rush. The letter had read, "Come to Solitude. Everything you need is here. No one ever leaves. It's a place you will call home." There was no return address, no explanation, just those cryptic words, sitting heavy in his mind. Michael had no idea what he was walking into, but something about the letter, something about the promise of a place where he could finally belong, pulled him in. It wasn't the first time he'd made a decision on a whim, but this one felt different. Something told him that this town would change his life forever. As Michael drove down the winding roads leading to Solitude, his thoughts were a mix of curiosity and caution. The trees grew denser as he neared the town, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch for miles. The further he went, the quieter it became. There were no other cars, no signs of life. It was as if the world outside of Solitude had vanished. Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a large, wrought iron gate. The gates were old, with intricate designs of vines and leaves twisted into patterns that seemed almost unnatural. A small sign hung above the gate, its letters faded and difficult to read, but Michael could just make out the words, "Welcome to Solitude." He hesitated for a moment, staring at the gate. It was as if the town itself was watching him, waiting. But after a deep breath, he pushed open the gate and drove in. The road ahead was lined with tall, ancient houses, each one uniquely designed but eerily similar in structure. It was as though they had been built to resemble each other, to blend into the landscape. And yet, despite their resemblance, something felt wrong. The windows were dark, the houses silent, as though they were holding their breath, waiting for someone to disturb the stillness. Michael didn't know what to expect, but he had no choice but to keep driving. He passed a few more houses before reaching the town square, where an old clock tower stood. It was a massive structure, its face cracked and weathered by time, but still standing tall in the center of the square. The clock had long since stopped ticking, its hands frozen at midnight. He parked the car and stepped out, feeling the chill of the evening air seep into his bones. The town was deserted. No people, no sounds, just an unsettling silence that seemed to hang over everything. The buildings loomed around him, their shadows stretching long across the cobblestone streets. The only movement was the occasional rustle of the wind, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. As he walked toward the town hall, a large stone building at the end of the square, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Only the empty streets and the eerie quiet of Solitude. Inside the town hall, the air was thick with dust. The walls were lined with old portraits of people Michael didn't recognize. Strangers, their eyes staring out from the frames with an almost knowing look. The floor creaked underfoot as he made his way to the front desk, where a woman sat, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She was an older woman, her hair silver and pulled back into a tight bun. Her eyes, though, were sharp and alert, like a hawk watching its prey. "Welcome to Solitude," she said in a voice that was both calm and unsettling. "I'm glad you've decided to join us." Michael stood there, unsure of what to say. I don't really know what I'm doing here," he admitted. "I got a letter, and—" "Yes," the woman interrupted, her smile never wavering. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Harper. There's no need for any questions. You've made the right choice. Solitude is where you belong." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. Her words were too precise, too rehearsed. It was as if she already knew everything about him, about why he had come here. He began, but she raised a hand, silencing him. "Everything will make sense soon enough," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "In time, you'll understand that no one ever leaves Solitude. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Michael opened his mouth to speak, but the woman was already turning away, signaling for him to follow her deeper into the building. As he walked through the dimly lit halls, Michael's thoughts raced. What had he gotten himself into? What was this place? And why did it feel like everyone here knew something he didn't? The woman stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. "Your room is ready," she said, her voice like honey. "Rest for the night. Tomorrow, you'll begin to see the truth of solitude." With that, she opened the door and stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Michael hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The room was small but cozy, with a large bed covered in a thick quilt, an old-fashioned dresser, and a window that looked out over the town square. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with dusty books, their spines faded and worn. A small fireplace sat in the corner, the hearth cold and empty. As he sat down on the bed, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The town, the people, the strange welcome, it was all too perfect. Too controlled. He glanced at the window again, staring out at the darkened streets. The clock tower's hands were still frozen at midnight. The sound of footsteps outside the door broke his concentration, and he quickly turned away from the window. He could feel the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on him, but he had no idea what they were. Not yet. Tomorrow, he told himself. Tomorrow, he would learn the truth about solitude. But little did he know, the truth was far more terrifying than he could ever imagine. The morning sun crept through the window, casting a pale light across the room. Michael awoke with a start, his heart racing, as though he had just escaped some terrible dream. For a moment, he lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake off the lingering sense of unease from the night before. The silence in the room was thick, suffocating even, and he could hear the faint sound of birds chirping outside, something that seemed almost out of place given the eerie stillness of the town. He sat up slowly, the old quilt slipping off him as he swung his legs over the edge of the bed. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he stood, his body stiff and sore from the uncomfortable bed. He looked around the room, taking in the details, the worn bookshelves, the heavy curtains that blocked out the light, the strange, distant feeling the room gave him. He took a deep breath and walked to the window, pulling the curtains aside just enough to peer out. The town square was empty, save for the lone figure of a man standing at the foot of the clock tower. His back was turned, but Michael could see his shoulders slumped, his body language heavy with something Michael couldn't quite identify. He quickly stepped away from the window, feeling a strange compulsion to stay hidden, as if the man might turn and see him, and that would mean something. Something he couldn't explain. "Get a hold of yourself," Michael muttered under his breath. He was here for a reason, something he had to find. He couldn't let his nerves get the better of him. After a quick wash and a change of clothes, Michael made his way down to the main hall of the town hall, where the woman from the night before, Mrs. Porter, was waiting. She was standing at a desk, sorting through some papers, her back to him. When she heard his footsteps, she turned and smiled that same unnerving smile, as though everything about the town was perfectly normal. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," she said in that calm, measured voice. "I trust you slept well?" Michael hesitated. "It was fine," he replied, though he didn't feel it was true. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about this place was wrong, deeply wrong. Mrs. Porter nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant, though she said nothing about it. "Today, you will begin your orientation into solitude," she said, gesturing toward the door. "There are a few things you need to know." Michael followed her as she led him through the winding halls of the town hall. The walls were adorned with more portraits, more faces that stared down at him, their eyes hollow yet knowing. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were all watching him, even though they were long dead. As they approached the back of the building, Mrs. Porter stopped in front of a large wooden door, its surface covered in intricate carvings of symbols Michael didn't recognize. She paused for a moment, her fingers lightly brushing the door's surface as if she was connecting with something that was beyond him. Finally, she turned to face him. "There are rules here in Solitude," she said, her tone dropping to a serious level. "Unspoken rules. And it is important that you understand them if you are to remain here." Michael frowned. "What kind of rules?" Mrs. Porter's eyes glinted. "The rules that keep this town running. The rules that keep it safe. Everyone here follows them, Mr. Harper. If they don't, well, things can become complicated." Complicated? Michael didn't like the sound of that. "What do you mean by complicated?" She smiled again, though it was colder this time, as if her patience was beginning to wear thin. "You will understand in time. For now, know this, there is no leaving Solitude. Ever. No matter what happens, no matter how badly you might want to, you cannot leave. No one ever does." Michael felt his heart skip a beat. "What do you mean?" "I came here because I had no choice. I thought this place could offer me something. But now you're telling me I can't leave." Mrs. Porter's gaze softened, but her voice remained firm. "You misunderstood. You came here because you needed to. You were drawn here. just like everyone else. And now that you are here, you will stay. And you will learn that this is not a place for escaping. This is a place for finding something deeper. Michael took a step back, his thoughts racing. He had no idea what she was talking about, but everything about her words, about the way she spoke, made him feel like there was something he wasn't seeing, something he wasn't being told. Before he could respond, Mrs. Porter opened the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room beyond. Inside was a table with several books piled on top, a few papers scattered about, and a chalkboard on the far wall covered in strange symbols. It looked like something out of an old library or a dusty study, but it wasn't the room itself that made Michael uneasy. It was the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something far bigger than he could comprehend. "Sit," Mrs. Porter instructed, gesturing to a chair at the table. "You'll need to familiarize yourself with these materials. They will help you understand the rules of solitude and your place in it." Michael sat down, though his mind was still spinning. He had come here seeking answers, but now he felt as though he had only fallen deeper into a web of questions. Why couldn't anyone leave this town? What was the truth behind the endless silence? And why did it feel like the townspeople already knew the answers, even though they weren't saying them? As he opened the first book before him, the words seemed to blur together, the letters twisting and turning on the page. It was like they were changing, morphing into something new. He blinked and rubbed his eyes, but when he looked back, the words had settled again, as if nothing had happened. And yet, in that moment, Michael knew Solitude was hiding something. Something that was going to change him forever. The evening sun hung low in the sky, casting an orange glow over the streets of Solitude. The town seemed to shimmer in the fading light, its buildings casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to stretch toward him, as though they were alive, waiting to engulf him. Michael walked slowly through the square, his mind still reeling from the strange encounter with Mrs. Porter and the unsettling rules of the town. The quiet was almost suffocating, and the air seemed thick with the weight of unspoken words. His thoughts were interrupted when a voice called out to him. "Mr. Harper." Michael turned to find a man approaching him. He was tall and thin, with sharp features and a kind smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His name was Thomas Calloway, and he had introduced himself as a resident of Solitude during Michael's first day in the town. He was one of the few people Michael had seen during his time here, but he had a way of making things seem normal, almost as though Solitude was a regular, everyday town, despite everything that felt so wrong about it. "Mrs. Porter told me you would be joining us for dinner tonight," Thomas said, his smile widening. "I thought I'd walk you to the gathering hall. It's not far from here." Michael nodded, though he was unsure whether he really wanted to go. Dinner with the residents of Solitude felt like another part of the strange ritual he seemed to be caught in. But there was something compelling about Thomas's presence. He seemed genuine enough, and Michael felt a strange pull to learn more about the town's inhabitants. As they walked, Thomas chatted about the town, mentioning the small things that seemed so ordinary, how the weather was always perfect, how the gardens always thrived, how the people always seemed happy. It was all too polished, too perfect. Michael couldn't help but notice the lack of any personal stories or real emotions in Thomas's words. It was as if the man was reciting a script, following the same patterns everyone else seemed to follow. As they reached the gathering hall, Michael could see a large group of people already inside, sitting at long wooden tables, laughing, talking, and eating. The room was warm and inviting, with large chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, casting soft, flickering light over the crowd. The smell of roasted meat and freshly baked bread filled the air, making Michael's stomach growl. Despite his unease, he felt an undeniable hunger that pulled him toward the food. Thomas led him to an empty seat at the far end of one of the tables. "We're glad you've decided to join us, Mr. Harper," he said, taking a seat beside him. "It's always a pleasure to welcome a new member to Solitude." Michael nodded, though his mind was still occupied with the strange things he had learned. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by new member," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the room. "What exactly does it mean to be a part of Solitude?" Thomas smiled, his eyes gleaming with a strange sort of understanding. "It means you are one of us now," he said softly, "and we take care of our own here. You'll see. In time, everything will make sense." The conversation fell silent for a moment as servers moved through the hall, placing plates of food in front of the residents. Michael couldn't help but notice that each person seemed to be eating with an almost mechanical precision, their movements synchronized, as if they were all following the same rhythm. There was no joy, no conversation about the food itself, only a quiet, orderly consumption. When a plate was placed in front of Michael, he hesitated for a moment before picking up his fork. The roast meat was tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked, and the bread fresh, warm, and soft. Yet, despite its perfection, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with the meal. Something that made it taste almost hollow. "You're not eating much, Mr. Harper," Thomas remarked, his voice tinged with concern. Is everything to your liking? Michael forced a smile. Yes, it's fine. Just not really hungry, I guess. Thomas didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he continued eating with the same practiced ease as everyone else. Michael glanced around the table, taking in the faces of the townspeople. They all looked content, their eyes glazed over with that same peaceful expression, as if nothing in the world could disturb them. It was like they were in some sort of trance, moving through life with no care or concern, as if they had no real desires or emotions of their own. But it was more than that. It was as though the people of Solitude had forgotten how to feel anything at all. They didn't laugh like normal people, didn't share stories or opinions. They simply existed, day after day, in this endless cycle of contentment. For the first time since his arrival, Michael felt a deep sense of dread settle in his stomach. He wasn't sure if it was the food, the strange atmosphere, or the unnerving sense of calm that surrounded him, but he felt like he was slowly being suffocated by the town. The walls were closing in on him, and no matter how much he tried to fight it, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was trapped. He glanced at Thomas again, who was watching him with a calm, almost knowing expression. "Tell me," Michael said, his voice shaking slightly. "What happens if someone doesn't want to stay here? What if they want to leave?" Thomas's smile faded, just for a moment, before it returned with a hint of something darker in his eyes. "No one ever leaves Solitude, Mr. Harper," he said softly, his voice low. "Not because they can't, but because they don't want to. They learn to belong. And when they do, they understand that there's nowhere else in the world that compares." Michael opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could speak, a strange sound echoed through the hall, like a distant, muffled bell ringing. The entire room seemed to freeze for a split second, and everyone stopped eating, their eyes all turning toward the clock tower in the distance. The moment passed, and the chatter resumed, as if nothing had happened. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the bell was some sort of signal, a signal that marked the passage of time in Solitude, a time that would never end, a place that would never let him leave. Michael woke up the next morning with the heavy weight of the previous night pressing on his chest. The unnerving dinner, the strange rituals, the unblinking eyes of the townspeople, it all swirled in his mind like a storm. For the first time since his arrival, he wasn't sure if he had made the right choice. The more he thought about it, the more suffocating the town seemed. It wasn't just the isolation, it was the feeling that someone, was always watching him. The sun had barely risen, but the town square was already alive with activity. People moved like clockwork, going about their daily routines with mechanical precision. There was no laughter, no chatter, just a silent dance of synchronized movements. It was as if everyone was playing a role, reciting lines in a script that had been written long before Michael arrived. And for some reason, Michael had been cast as the stranger, the one who didn't belong. After a quick breakfast at a small cafe, a meal that was just as perfect but strangely tasteless, he decided to take a walk around the town. He needed to clear his head, to gather his thoughts and figure out what was really going on. He couldn't shake the sense that the town was hiding something from him, something important. As he walked through the streets, he noticed more details that he hadn't seen before. There were no children playing, no pets running through the yards, no street vendors calling out to customers. The streets were pristine, as though they had been swept and polished within an inch of their lives. Every house seemed identical, every garden meticulously tended. It was as if the entire town had been designed to be flawless, to never show any sign of life beyond the surface. He turned a corner and found himself at the edge of a large park, the kind with tall trees, winding paths, and benches scattered throughout. It was a peaceful place, but something about it felt wrong. The trees stood too straight, their branches evenly spaced, their leaves too symmetrical. Even the benches seemed placed at perfect intervals, as though they had been carefully arranged. Michael paused at the entrance to the park, his gaze shifting to the large stone fountain in the center. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the sky like a mirror. But there was something off about it. The water didn't ripple, even when the breeze blew through the air. It was as if the fountain was frozen in time. He stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what he was seeing, when a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You'll get used to it." Michael turned to find Thomas standing behind him, his smile as wide and warm as ever. But there was something in his eyes that made Michael's stomach tighten. It was the same look he had seen the night before, the look that said he knew more than he was letting on. "Used to what?" Michael asked, his voice sharp. "Used to all of this? The perfect streets, the silent people, the way everything feels like a stage set? What's going on here, Thomas?" Thomas didn't seem fazed by the intensity of Michael's words. Instead, he merely chuckled softly, his eyes glinting with that unsettling, knowing look. "It's Solitude, Mr. Harper," he said. "The town has its ways. The people here live by a different rhythm, one that doesn't require noise or chaos. We don't need distractions. We're at peace. Michael's patience was wearing thin. Peace, he repeated. This isn't peace. It's a prison. I can feel it. Everyone here is walking around like they're in some kind of trance. They don't even talk to each other. They don't talk to me. Thomas's smile faltered for just a second, but then it was back, brighter than ever. It's not a prison, Mr. Harper, he said in a soft, almost soothing voice. It's a sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world is left behind. People come here to find peace, to belong. And once you've found it, you'll never want to leave. Michael's blood ran cold. He had heard those words before, you'll never want to leave. It was as if they were meant to lull him into submission, to convince him that there was no escape, that he was trapped, but he just didn't realize it yet. I don't want peace, Michael said, his voice low and steady. I want answers. I want to know why no one here talks. Why everything is so perfect. Why the town won't let anyone leave. Thomas's expression grew darker, his eyes narrowing as if assessing whether Michael was ready for the truth. For a long moment, there was silence between them, the only sound the distant rustling of the trees in the park. Finally, Thomas spoke. It's not that no one talks, Mr. Harper. It's that no one needs to anymore. The truth is, Solitude isn't a place where people live like they do in the outside world. It's a place of transformation. Michael frowned. Transformation? What are you talking about? Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. People come here to leave behind their old lives. They come here because they're tired of the world, the noise, the chaos. Here they can be free of all that. And when they finally embrace the peace, they become part of Solitude. They learn to belong. Michael's head spun. Become part of Solitude? What does that mean? Are you telling me that people come here to disappear? To give up everything? Thomas's eyes darkened, and his smile faded. In a sense, yes. But it's not about disappearing. It's about belonging to something greater. Solitude is more than just a town. It's a place that changes you. It becomes a part of you. And once you've made that transformation, you'll understand why no one leaves. Why no one ever wants to. Michael felt a chill crawl up his spine. He was no longer sure if Thomas was trying to comfort him or frighten him. The air around them seemed to grow colder, and the stillness of the town pressed in on him like a heavy weight. I don't want to become part of Solitude, Michael said, his voice shaking. I don't want any part of this. Thomas's smile returned, though it lacked warmth now. You'll see, Mr. Harper. You'll see. It's only a matter of time before you understand. With that, Thomas turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing in the park, surrounded by the silent, unblinking trees. Michael watched him disappear into the distance, a growing sense of dread settling deep within him. He had to find out the truth. He had to escape, because something told him that the longer he stayed in Solitude, the harder it would be to leave. The days blurred together in solitude. Michael's attempts to get answers only seemed to raise more questions. Every time he thought he had figured something out, something new would happen to throw him off course. His unease grew with each passing moment, and he could feel the walls of the town pressing in on him, slowly closing him off from the outside world. The people, if they could even be called people, were growing more difficult to understand. They didn't speak like normal humans. They didn't laugh or argue or express any emotion beyond a constant, passive calm. They didn't seem to have families or individual desires. They existed, plain and simple, and nothing more. Everyone he spoke to answered his questions in the same cryptic manner, always with that smile that never quite reached their eyes. After his conversation with Thomas, Michael had spent the past few days trying to find a way out. But no matter where he went, the town seemed to stretch on forever, its streets winding and repeating in a way that felt unnatural. It was as though the town itself was a maze, and he was a rat trapped in it, circling the same path again and again. This afternoon, he found himself wandering the outskirts of the town, where the trees grew thicker, and the air was even colder than usual. He needed space, a moment to think without the watchful eyes of the townspeople bearing down on him. The wind howled through the branches of the trees, rustling the leaves like whispered voices in the distance. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, a wall of impenetrable darkness surrounding him. He hadn't meant to go so far, but now he realized he had crossed the threshold into a part of the town he had never seen before. The houses here were older, the trees more twisted, and the air heavier. The silence here felt even more oppressive than usual. There were no birds, no animals, just an eerie stillness that pressed against his ears. And then he saw it. A small building, hidden away behind a wall of ivy and thick branches. It was barely visible from where he stood, but it stood out against the backdrop of the dark trees. Michael felt a strange compulsion to approach it. He moved forward, his feet crunching against the dry leaves beneath him, the air growing colder with every step. As he drew closer, he could make out the shape of the building, a crumbling stone structure, its windows dark and covered in thick grime. The door was ajar, hanging crookedly on its hinges. The building looked abandoned, but something about it called to him. It was as if this place, this forgotten corner of Solitude, held the answers he had been searching for. He pushed the door open, its creaking sound echoing through the empty woods. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single flickering candle. Dust covered the floors and shelves, and the air was thick with the smell of old wood and mildew. There was a table in the center of the room, cluttered with papers and strange artifacts, objects that Michael couldn't begin to identify. The walls were covered in drawings, symbols, and words he didn't understand. It was as if someone had been preparing for something here, something big. At the far end of the room, a large leather-bound book sat open on a pedestal. Michael moved closer, drawn to it as though it held the key to everything. The pages were yellowed with age, the writing strange and jagged. He couldn't read most of it, but a few words stood out to him. Solitude's origin. The price of peace. The boundaries of choice. He flipped the pages, his heart racing as he scanned through the text. As he read, the words began to form a horrifying picture of the town. Solitude, it seemed, was not just a place for peace. It was a place where people were changed, transformed into something else entirely. The town wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a prison that reshaped its inhabitants, erasing their desires, their memories, and their will to leave. The book spoke of rituals, rituals that had been performed for generations to ensure that no one left, that the people remained forever bound to the town. There were mentions of strange ceremonies, of ancient practices that had long since been forgotten by the outside world. But here, in Solitude, they were still very much alive. As Michael read, the words seemed to shift before his eyes, as though the book was alive, adjusting itself to reveal something new. A single passage stood out, and his breath caught in his throat as he read it aloud. Once the transformation is complete, the soul of the individual is bound to Solitude. They become a part of the town, a piece of its fabric. Those who resist, those who fight, are forever lost in the void. Michael's hand trembled as he closed the book. The weight of what he had just read pressed down on him like a heavy stone. The town didn't just trap its residents physically, it consumed them, erasing their identities and replacing them with something else. Something that belonged to Solitude and nothing else. He stood there in the dim room, the reality of his situation crashing down on him. He wasn't just stuck in Solitude, he was becoming part of it. And once that transformation took place, there would be no escape. He would never leave, not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't want to. And that, he realized, was the most terrifying part of all. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him, the sound soft and deliberate, like someone walking with purpose. He turned quickly, his heart racing, to find Thomas standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come here, Michael," Thomas said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "You've learned things you weren't meant to know." Michael's pulse raced as he backed away from the book, his mind spinning. "What is this place? What are you doing to us?" "To me." Thomas stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "We're not doing anything to you, Michael. You came here because you needed to. You came here because you wanted to leave behind the noise of the world, the chaos, the pain. Solitude offers peace. It offers a chance to belong. And once you've embraced that peace, you'll understand. You'll want to stay." Michael's heart pounded in his chest as the weight of Thomas's words hit him. He had come to Solitude seeking answers, but what he had found was far worse than anything he had imagined. The town wasn't just a place, it was a force, a living entity that shaped its inhabitants, molding them into something else, something that could never leave. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the crumbling building, and Michael's thoughts raced. He needed to escape, but it was becoming clear that escape was impossible. Because Solitude wasn't just a town, it was a prison. The next few days passed in a haze for Michael. He had barely slept, barely eaten, and his mind was consumed with one thought: escape. Solitude's hold on him was growing stronger, and he could feel the transformation creeping into his very soul. The town wasn't just a place, it was a force, a living, breathing entity that was changing him, bending his will, and erasing his desires. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, that sense that he was losing himself. The person he had been before, the man who had sought out Solitude, was slipping away, replaced by something else, something that belonged to the town. He had tried to leave. He'd walked to the edge of the town, only to find the roads stretching endlessly before him, looping back on themselves in a never-ending cycle. No matter how far he walked, no matter how many turns he took, he always ended up back in the town square. The streets seemed to shift, change direction, rearrange themselves like a twisted maze that refused to let him go. It was as though the town itself was aware of his resistance, aware of his desire to escape, and it wouldn't let him. Every time he tried to break free, the town pushed back harder. And yet, in the depths of his despair, something new began to emerge. He could feel it, something inside of him shifting. His thoughts were becoming foggy, his memories clouded by the constant repetition of the town's strange rhythms. He couldn't remember why he had come to Solitude in the first place. It felt as if it had happened in another life, a distant memory he could no longer grasp. The people around him, their passive faces, their empty smiles, were beginning to feel familiar. He could almost sense the pull, the strange comfort that their calm existence offered. He understood why they stayed, why they never wanted to leave. But that realization terrified him. The more he accepted Solitude's embrace, the more he felt himself slipping away. He couldn't allow himself to be consumed by it. Not when he had come here seeking freedom. Not when he had come here to escape. He needed to find a way out. A real way out. On the fourth day after his visit to the hidden building, Michael found himself back at the town hall. He had avoided it for a while, but now, with his mind clouded and his sense of time fading, he felt a strange compulsion to go back. He needed answers. He needed someone to tell him what was happening to him, what was happening to this town. When he entered the town hall, the familiar silence greeted him, but there was something different about it today. The air felt thicker, heavier, as if something important was about to happen. The walls seemed to close in on him as he walked down the long corridor toward Mrs. Porter's office. He had to speak to her. She was the one who had first welcomed him to Solitude, the one who had spoken about the town's rules. She had to know what was going on. He knocked on the door, and Mrs. Porter's soft voice called out from inside. "Come in, Mr. Harper." He opened the door and stepped inside. The room was as pristine as ever, but today it felt different. There was a subtle shift in the air, a tension that Michael could almost taste. Mrs. Porter was sitting at her desk, her fingers delicately tracing the edge of a stack of papers. When she looked up at him, her eyes were filled with something that seemed almost sad. She smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good to see you, Mr. Harper," she said, her voice gentle. "How are you feeling today?" Michael's heart raced. He could feel his mind beginning to slip, but he fought against it. "I need to know what's happening here. What's happening to me?" Mrs. Porter's smile faltered, just slightly, before she regained her composure. "You've started to understand, haven't you?" she asked, her voice a soft murmur. "You've started to see the truth of Solitude." Michael's breath caught in his throat. The truth? What truth? All I see is a town that traps people, that changes them into something they're not. I can feel it happening to me, and I don't want it. I need to leave. I need to get out of here. Mrs. Porter stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and graceful. She walked over to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "You think you want to leave, Michael, but that's only because you haven't embraced it yet. You haven't embraced the peace, the transformation. But in time, you will. You'll see that there is nothing outside of Solitude worth going back to." Michael shook his head, his panic rising. "No, I'm not like them. I'm not like the others. I don't want this peace. I don't want to be part of this place. I'm not one of them." Mrs. Porter's gaze softened, and she placed a hand gently on his arm. "That's the hardest part, Michael. Accepting the peace. Accepting that this town is where you belong. It's hard at first, but soon, it becomes effortless. Soon, you'll see that there is nothing outside of Solitude but noise, but chaos. Here in Solitude we are free. Free from all that." Michael recoiled from her touch, his heart pounding. He couldn't listen to her. He couldn't let her convince him that this was all there was. "I'm not staying here," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. "I don't care what happens. I won't let Solitude take me." For a moment, Mrs. Porter simply stood there, watching him with a mixture of pity and understanding. Then she sighed softly. "You will understand, Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You will understand in time. You can't fight it forever." With that, she turned away, walking back to her desk. Michael stood there for a long moment, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He could feel the truth of it, deep down. She was right. The more he fought, the more Solitude was pulling him in. The transformation was happening, whether he wanted it or not. But Michael wasn't ready to give in. Not yet. He had to keep fighting. He had to keep looking for a way out. The days felt like they were slipping through Michael's fingers. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how determined he was to escape, Solitude seemed to find new ways to keep him in its grasp. He couldn't remember how long he had been there. Time no longer felt like it had any meaning. Each day bled into the next, and his sense of reality was growing increasingly warped. He had tried everything he could think of to escape. He had explored every corner of the town, searched for hidden exits, but everything was a dead end. The roads looped in impossible ways, the streets folded back on themselves like a labyrinth, and the more he resisted, the more the town seemed to absorb him. The town had a way of twisting the truth, and Michael was starting to realize just how much he had already changed. The more he fought against it, the harder it became to remember who he was before he came here. His thoughts were clouded, his memories slipping away like sand through his fingers. But there was something he hadn't tried yet. The town had its secrets, secrets buried deep within its walls. If he could just find the heart of it, the source of its power, maybe he could break free. He had to find out what made Solitude so irresistible to its residents, and why no one ever wanted to leave. He had heard whispers of a place, a hidden part of the town where the truth could be found. It was an old building, a structure that wasn't marked on any map, a place that the townspeople avoided. They spoke of it only in hushed tones, as though it were a place of dark power, a place where no one dared to go. Michael didn't know why, but he felt drawn to it. The desperation inside him had reached a breaking point. If he didn't do something soon, he would lose himself completely. He had to see the truth with his own eyes. It was late at night when he left his room, slipping through the town's silent streets under the cover of darkness. The town was eerily still, the usual hum of life replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to settle over everything. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a cold, silvery light over the houses and streets, making everything appear even more surreal. He moved quietly through the alleys, avoiding the main roads. He didn't want to attract attention. He had to find this building, whatever it was, before the town caught wind of his plan. The whispering in his mind grew louder, urging him to turn back, to give in to the peace the town offered. But Michael wasn't going to give in. Not yet. Finally, after what felt like hours of walking, he arrived at the building. It was tucked away in a corner of the town, hidden behind a thick veil of ivy and overgrown hedges. The structure was old, its stone walls crumbling and weathered by time. There were no lights inside, and the windows were dark and boarded up. It was a place forgotten by everyone, and that made it the perfect place for Michael to seek answers. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the sound echoing in the empty space. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon filtering through cracks in the walls. The room was large and empty, save for a few broken pieces of furniture scattered around. It looked like an abandoned church or temple, a place where rituals had once been performed but now lay forgotten. At the far end of the room, a large ornate mirror stood against the wall. Its frame was gilded, covered in intricate carvings of symbols Michael didn't recognize. The mirror was massive, its surface smooth and untouched by time, as though it had been preserved for some greater purpose. Michael approached the mirror cautiously, his reflection staring back at him. For a moment, he thought he saw something move behind him, but when he turned around, there was nothing there. He shook his head. The fear was starting to take hold of him, but he couldn't stop now. He had to know what was going on. He reached out and touched the mirror's surface. The moment his fingers brushed against it, a strange sensation washed over him, like a jolt of electricity running through his veins. The mirror seemed to hum with energy, as if it were alive. His reflection flickered, distorting for a brief moment, before settling back into place. And then, everything changed. The room around him seemed to fade away, the walls disappearing into a swirling blackness. Michael's heart raced as the mirror became the only thing he could focus on. The reflection in the glass shifted, showing not just his own face, but a vision of the town. Solitude, but twisted and dark. He saw the streets lined with people, but they were different now. Their faces were blank, hollow, their eyes empty, and their bodies stiff, as if they were nothing more than puppets controlled by an unseen force. The vision shifted again, this time showing the clock tower at the heart of Solitude. The hands of the clock moved backwards, as if time itself was unraveling. The town was changing, becoming something darker, something that seemed to consume everything in its path. And then, the reflection shifted once more, showing a face that Michael recognized all too well. It was his own face, but different. His features were sharper, his eyes glazed over with a vacant, emotionless stare. He saw himself standing among the people of Solitude, his body still, his expression blank. It was then that Michael realized the truth. The mirror wasn't just showing him a vision of the town. It was showing him the future. His future. He was going to become like them, like the others. He was going to lose himself, his will, his desires, until he was nothing more than an empty shell, a puppet controlled by solitude itself. "No," he whispered, stepping back from the mirror. "No, I won't let it happen." But the mirror didn't stop. The vision continued to unfold, showing him the process of transformation, the way the town slowly consumed its residents, erasing who they were until they became nothing more than pieces in its puzzle. He stumbled away from the mirror, his mind reeling. The truth was undeniable now. Solitude didn't just trap its residents physically, it consumed them entirely. It erased their past, their memories, their very identity, and in return, it gave them peace, a hollow peace that came at the cost of everything that made them human. As he turned to leave, he heard a voice behind him, soft and familiar. "You can't run from it, Michael." He spun around to find Thomas standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Thomas said, his voice calm and almost soothing. "You've seen what happens when you fight it. But you can't fight forever. Solitude is stronger than you. It always wins." Michael's chest tightened, but he stood his ground. "I won't let it take me," he said, his voice shaking but resolute. Thomas smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "You will. You already have. The transformation has already begun. You just don't realize it yet." With that, Thomas turned and walked away, leaving Michael standing alone in the dark room. The mirror glowed faintly behind him, its surface smooth and cold, reflecting his fear and his growing desperation. He had seen the truth, but now the question was, could he escape it? Michael's feet moved through the streets of Solitude like they were no longer his own. The town had a rhythm to it now, a quiet, oppressive pulse that matched the thudding of his heart. The mirror had shown him the truth of what Solitude did to its inhabitants, the truth of what he was becoming. But even now, as he walked through the eerily quiet streets, something inside of him refused to accept it. He wouldn't become like them. It was one thing to see the vision, to understand that the town consumed everything in its path. But it was something else entirely to feel it happening to him. Every step he took, every breath he drew, he could feel the change creeping in, like a shadow following him, whispering at the edges of his mind. The desire to resist was still there, but the pull of solitude, the need for peace, for calm, was growing stronger. Michael knew he didn't have much time left. The transformation had already begun. The more he fought it, the more the town seemed to close in on him. But he wouldn't, let go. Not yet. He had to leave. He had to find a way to escape the grasp of solitude before it completely took him. But where could he go? Every road, every path, seemed to loop back into the town. The same streets, the same houses, the same faces. He was stuck in a never-ending cycle. There had to be something he had missed. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. Michael turned quickly, expecting to see Thomas or one of the others. But to his surprise, it was Mrs. Porter, walking toward him with a calm, measured gait. Her eyes were kind, but there was something in them, a sadness perhaps or pity, that made Michael's stomach churn. "Mr. Harper," she said, her voice soft. "You're looking for answers, aren't you?" Michael didn't respond. He didn't want to hear her words. He didn't want to hear anything that might make him feel like giving in. "Solitude has been good to you, Michael," Mrs. Porter continued. "It has given you peace. It has given you a place to belong. You've been fighting it for so long, and yet you still don't understand. This is what you need. This is what you've been looking for your whole life." "I didn't come here for this," Michael snapped, the anger rising in his chest. "I came here for answers, to escape, to find something real. Not this prison." Mrs. Porter sighed, her gaze lingering on him with a strange, almost loving expression. "You don't understand yet, but you will. You're only resisting because you don't know what peace feels like. Solitude is a gift, Michael. A gift that frees you from the noise of the world, from the chaos, from the struggle. And once you accept it, you'll understand. You'll see the truth of it." "No," Michael said, his voice growing more desperate. "This isn't freedom. It's a lie. It's a trap. I've seen it, what you're doing to everyone here. What you're doing to me." Mrs. Porter's smile never wavered, but there was a coldness in her eyes now. "You're already part of Solitude, Michael. The transformation is already taking place. There's no going back now. No," Michael yelled, stepping back. "I won't let it happen. I won't become like them." Her expression softened, but it wasn't kindness. It was pity. "You don't have a choice. The price of resistance is far worse than the peace you seek. The longer you fight, the more the town will pull at you. It will tear you apart until you finally give in. And when you do, you will belong to Solitude, just like the rest of us. You will never want to leave. You'll be at peace. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time, he could hear the faint pull of the town's rhythm, that deep, hypnotic call. It was harder to ignore now. The pull was becoming stronger, and he could feel himself weakening, his willpower slipping away. It was as if the town itself was feeding on his resistance, growing stronger with every step he took against it. But Michael couldn't stop. Not yet. I have to get out of here, he whispered, more to himself than to Mrs. Porter. She shook her head, a sad, almost resigned smile crossing her face. There is no way out, Michael. Not now. You've seen the mirror. You know what happens to those who try to leave. They are lost. Forever. I'll take my chances, Michael muttered, turning away from her and walking faster, his mind racing. I'd rather be lost than be trapped here. But Mrs. Porter didn't follow. Instead, Michael heard her voice, soft but piercing, echo in the silence of the street. Remember, Michael, she called after him. The price of resistance is far greater than the price of peace. Michael kept walking, the words echoing in his ears, but he refused to stop. He had to keep going. He passed by the clock tower, which still stood frozen at midnight, its face cracked and worn. For a brief moment, he thought he saw the hands of the clock twitch, just slightly, as if the town itself were adjusting to his movements. But he didn't stop to look closer. He couldn't afford to. He had to keep going. He had to find the heart of Solitude, the source of its power, and destroy it. It was his only chance. The town, however, had other plans. As he reached the edge of the square, he saw a figure standing in his path. It was Thomas, standing in the middle of the street, blocking his way. His expression was calm, but there was something colder in his eyes now, something that sent a chill down Michael's spine. You're wasting your time, Michael, Thomas said, his voice low but firm. You're already one of us. You're already part of Solitude. No, Michael said, his voice shaking with determination. I'm not one of you. I'm not staying here. I'm leaving, and I will find a way out. Thomas shook his head slowly. You can't escape, Michael. Solitude is more than just a town. It's part of you now. There's nowhere you can go that Solitude won't follow. Michael took a step back, panic rising within him. No. I won't let it happen. But Thomas didn't move. He simply stood there, watching Michael with a pitying look, as if he already knew the outcome. You've made your choice, Michael. But understand this, Solitude doesn't let go. Once it has you, it will never let you go. It will take everything from you, piece by piece, until you have nothing left but peace. And as Michael turned and tried to push past him, the world around him began to blur, the edges of his vision darkening. He stumbled, his breath coming in short gasps. His head spun, and before he knew it, he was on the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. The last thing he heard before everything went black was Thomas's voice, soft and almost kind. Welcome home, Michael. Welcome to Solitude. Michael awoke with a start, his head pounding and his body aching. The world around him was a blur, the edges of his vision swimming as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The last thing he remembered was stumbling through the streets, desperate to escape, only to collapse in front of Thomas. His body felt like it was made of lead, his limbs stiff and unresponsive, but there was no time to waste. He couldn't let Solitude win. He tried to sit up, but his arms and legs wouldn't cooperate. They felt heavy, as though someone or something was pressing down on him. His mind felt foggy, distant, as if he were underwater. It was difficult to focus, difficult to think clearly. A soft voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. Take it easy, Michael. You've been through a lot. Michael blinked, his vision clearing just enough to make out a figure standing by his side. It was Mrs. Porter, her face calm and serene as ever, though her eyes held a new kind of depth. It was the kind of depth that spoke of knowing, of seeing things that Michael could never understand. She was seated beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture perfect. You're in the care of the town now, she said softly. You'll be fine. You just need to rest. Michael felt a surge of anger, his pulse quickening. I don't want your help, he gritted out, his voice weak but determined. I don't want your peace. I want to leave. Mrs. Porter's gaze softened, but it wasn't in sympathy. It was understanding, almost sad. You're already here, Michael. You've been here longer than you realize. No, Michael said through clenched teeth. I've been fighting it. I've been fighting Solitude, and I'm not giving in. I'm not like you. I'm not like them. Solitude isn't something you fight, Michael, she said, her voice low but firm. It's something you become. You've been resisting for so long because you didn't understand. You thought you were running from something, but now you see the truth. You are running toward it. Towards peace. Towards belonging. Michael felt the ground shift beneath him, as though the very world was moving, pulling him in every direction. The town seemed to be alive, vibrating, breathing, wrapping itself around him in a suffocating embrace. It wasn't just the physical pull anymore, it was in his mind. His thoughts felt fractured, pieces slipping away, his memories starting to blur into one. "No," he whispered, trying to move his fingers, but they felt numb, useless. I won't be like them." "You already are," Mrs. Porter said, her voice like a lullaby. "You've already begun. It's already happening, Michael. And there's no going back." A strange calm washed over him. He couldn't move. He couldn't speak. His body felt paralyzed, yet somehow, his mind was still working, still aware of what was happening. The darkness in his vision seemed to grow, creeping inward like the corners of his reality were slowly disappearing. The more he tried to fight it, the more exhausted he became. His mind was slipping, his memories fading like the dying embers of a fire. He could barely remember who he was anymore, or why he had come to Solitude in the first place. It was as if all of that, his past, his thoughts, his identity, was being erased, gently and silently, as if it never existed. Mrs. Porter stood, her movement graceful and slow, like the entire town was in tune with her. "Rest now, Michael. Solitude will take care of you. You will see the truth soon. You will belong." The world around him began to fade, and for the first time since his arrival, Michael felt an overwhelming pull toward the darkness. He wanted to give in. He wanted to accept the peace, to stop fighting, to stop struggling against something that was inevitable. But as the blackness crept closer, something inside of him refused to surrender. His will, though fading, remained, fighting against the tide that sought to erase him. He could still hear her voice, soft, soothing. "Michael, it's all right." But this time, something in him snapped. A flicker of clarity broke through the fog. He didn't want to belong. He didn't want to become a part of this place. This was not freedom, it was a prison, and he wouldn't let it take him. With everything he had left, Michael forced himself to focus. He couldn't remember how long he'd been fighting, but now, in the suffocating silence of the room, it was his last chance to break free. He had to break through the fog. He had to find the strength to fight against Solitude's influence, to fight against the peace it offered, because that peace was a lie. He took a deep breath, though it felt like it was his last. And then, slowly, with all the energy he could muster, he opened his eyes. His vision was blurry, his limbs weak, but he pushed himself up, the room tilting around him. Every step, every motion felt like it might be his last. He wasn't sure how, but somehow, he knew what he had to do. It wasn't enough to just escape the physical walls of Solitude. He had to find the source, the heart of the town's power. He had to destroy it. That was the only way out. As Michael stood, unsteady on his feet, he heard Mrs. Porter's voice again, like a distant echo, as if she were speaking from across an ocean. "You can't escape, Michael. You can't fight what you've become." He ignored her words, his vision clearing slightly as he steadied himself. He could feel it now, the weight of Solitude pushing against him. But this time, he wasn't going to let it win. With every step, the town seemed to push back harder, but Michael fought through it, using the last of his willpower to move forward. His body was weak, his mind foggy, but he refused to stop. He had to find the heart of Solitude. He had to destroy it. Michael's feet moved as if they were no longer his own. The weight of Solitude's hold was crushing, and every step he took felt like it was a battle against his own body. The town pressed in on him from all sides, its oppressive silence and peace like a constant, suffocating presence. His thoughts were scattered, his mind clouded, but deep within him, a single truth remained. He couldn't give in. Not now. Not when the very essence of who he was at stake. He stumbled through the streets, his movements slow and unsteady, but the urgency within him kept him going. His chest was tight, his heart pounding with a desperation he hadn't felt before. He had to find the heart of Solitude, the place where it all began, the source of the town's power. If he could destroy it, he could break free. He could escape. But where was it? The town had no center, no defining feature that marked its core. Everything was symmetrical, perfect, intentionally designed to keep anyone from finding the truth. But Michael knew he couldn't stop. He couldn't give up. Not now. The fog in his mind thickened, and he swayed on his feet. His vision blurred, and he heard the faint whisper of voices in the distance, soft, melodic, like a lullaby that seemed to pull at him. The voices called to him, urging him to stop, to rest, to return to the peace. But he couldn't. His body fought against him, his mind heavy with exhaustion. He could feel the pull of the town's influence on every fiber of his being, trying to coax him back into its fold. Solitude was trying to take him, to erase him. But he fought. He pushed forward, taking a sharp left turn down an alleyway that felt darker, colder, than the rest of the town. The buildings here were older, the windows darkened with grime. The streets were empty, eerily still. The pull of Solitude was weaker here, as if the town itself was afraid of this part. Michael's steps quickened as he neared the end of the alley, his breath shallow and ragged. He felt close. He knew it. And then he saw it. At the end of the alley stood a large, imposing building, unlike anything else in the town. It was ancient, its walls cracked and covered in ivy, the stonework dark with age. The door was massive, made of heavy wood, its surface adorned with strange carvings that seemed to shift and shimmer in the dim light. Michael's heart raced as he approached the door, every instinct in his body telling him that this was it. This was the heart of Solitude. His hand reached out, and for a moment, he hesitated. The whispers grew louder, and he could feel the town's power pushing against him, urging him to turn back, to give in. But Michael couldn't stop now. He couldn't let Solitude win. With one final, trembling breath, he pushed open the door. Inside, the room was vast and dimly lit, the air thick with dust and decay. The walls were lined with old worn tapestries, their colors faded and torn. At the far end of the room, a massive stone altar stood in the center, bathed in an eerie, cold light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. The altar was covered in strange symbols, carvings that matched those on the door. And then, Michael saw it. Atop the altar, glowing faintly, was a small, crystalline object, a gemstone, shaped like a heart. It pulsed with an almost hypnotic light, a rhythmic throb that seemed to echo in Michael's chest. The moment his eyes locked onto it, he felt a wave of understanding flood his mind. This was it, the source of Solitude's power. This was the heart of the town. The gemstone was the key to everything, the core of the piece that had ensnared everyone. He could feel its pull, strong and unyielding, but he steeled himself against it. His thoughts were scattered, but deep inside, he knew what he had to do. He had to destroy it. Only then could Solitude's power be broken, and the hold it had on him and on everyone else would be gone. He took a step forward, then another. His movements were slow and labored, each step a battle. His body screamed for him to stop, to rest, but Michael fought through the pain. He couldn't stop now. When he reached the altar, the gemstone pulsed more rapidly, as if aware of his presence. The light grew brighter, casting strange shadows across the room. Michael could feel his mind beginning to slip again, the edges of his consciousness growing blurred, but he pushed through it. He reached out with trembling hands, grabbing the gemstone. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, blinding and overwhelming. It was like being caught in the heart of a storm, a whirlwind of light and sound. The force of it nearly knocked him off his feet, and he felt his body jerk and convulse as the power surged through him. "No!" he shouted, fighting against the force. "I won't be part of you." But the gemstone's power continued to pull at him, its energy flowing through him, trying to consume him. Michael's mind was splitting, his body racked with pain as the town's influence tried to take hold of him. It was everything he had fought against, everything he feared. The peace, the calm, the nothingness that would erase him. But Michael clung to his will, to the last shred of who he was. He couldn't let it take him. He wouldn't. With one final, desperate cry, he ripped the gemstone from its pedestal. The world exploded in a blinding flash of light. The blinding light that erupted when Michael tore the gemstone from its pedestal seemed to stretch on forever. His body trembled as the raw power coursed through him, surging with the force of the town's entire being. For a moment, he thought he might be consumed by it. The world around him twisted and bent as if the fabric of reality itself was being torn apart. His thoughts spun wildly, his mind fracturing under the weight of the power that was trying to force itself into his very soul. But as the light grew, a strange clarity took over him. In the depths of the storm, he saw it. The heart of Solitude was not just the gemstone, it was the town itself. The town had always been the living entity, the consciousness that controlled everything, and the gemstone had merely been a conduit, a focus for its power. By ripping it from the altar, Michael had struck a blow, but he hadn't broken the town entirely. Not yet. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on. The power was so overwhelming that it was suffocating him, drowning him in waves of distorted memories, broken thoughts, and fractured pieces of reality. He could hear voices in his head, distant, familiar voices, but they all sounded distant, fading into a quiet hum that filled every corner of his mind. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded. The storm that raged within him quieted, leaving him breathless, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. His hands, still gripping the gemstone, shook violently, and his knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed to the cold stone floor of the altar room, gasping for air, his body weak and trembling. For a few moments, everything was still. The oppressive silence of solitude settled back in, but it was different now. The town felt empty, as though the pulse of life that had once driven it was faltering. Michael could feel it, a slight shift in the atmosphere, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The gemstone, now dull and lifeless in his hand, seemed to have lost its power. The pulsing glow that had filled the room was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Michael stared at it, his vision blurry, his mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. For a moment, he thought he had failed. But then, he heard a voice. "Michael!" The sound was faint, distant, but unmistakable. It was Mrs. Porter's voice, and it sent a chill down his spine. He looked around, trying to make sense of the emptiness, but there was no one in the room with him. The door behind him remained shut, the corridors outside silent. "Michael, it's too late." The voice was clearer now, and Michael felt a cold shiver race up his spine. It wasn't just the voice of Mrs. Porter, it was the voice of the town itself, the very consciousness that had controlled everything, that had shaped the people, the peace, and the world around him. He forced himself to stand, his body weak but determined. He had no idea how, but somehow, he knew the truth now. Solitude wasn't a town. It was a prison, yes, but more than that, it was a living thing. And by tearing the gemstone from its altar, he hadn't destroyed it. He had wounded it. And now, it was fighting back. The ground beneath him began to tremble, faint at first, but soon the vibrations grew stronger, the air growing thick with the weight of something ancient and powerful awakening. Michael staggered forward, clutching the gemstone tightly, but the room began to twist again, the walls bending as if they were made of liquid. He could feel the pull, the presence of solitude itself, closing in on him. "Do you think you can just walk away, Michael?" The voice was everywhere now, surrounding him, echoing in his ears. "You are part of solitude. You always have been." "No," Michael said, his voice hoarse, but his words defiant. "I'm not part of you. I will never be part of you." But even as he spoke, the air around him seemed to thicken, the edges of his vision fading. He could feel his body weakening, the pull of solitude trying to draw him back, to consume him completely. His legs wavered beneath him, and the gemstone, once cold and dull, seemed to pulse with an energy that was trying to invade his mind, erase his will. He had made a mistake. The realization hit him like a wave crashing over him. By trying to destroy the gemstone, he had only wounded solitude. He hadn't broken it, not truly. The town still lived, still breathed, still controlled everything. It was connected to him now, and the consequences of his actions were just beginning to unfold. He was fighting a losing battle. The ground shook harder, and Michael stumbled, falling to his knees, his head spinning. His vision blurred again, and the voices around him grew louder, drowning him in a sea of whispers. His past, his memories, his very sense of self began to blur, becoming nothing more than fragments, slipping away as solitude tried to claim him once and for all. "No," Michael whispered, his breath shallow. I won't give in." The room around him seemed to collapse into shadow, the very walls of the altar room now twisting into grotesque shapes, as if the town itself was closing in on him. The pulsing light of the gemstone flickered, growing brighter and brighter, until it felt as though the very heart of solitude was about to explode. And then, in the darkest moment, when it seemed as though he would lose himself completely, a single thought pierced through the chaos. "I have to break it. I have to finish this." With everything left in him, Michael rose to his feet, his legs shaking violently. He could feel solitude closing in on him, could feel it trying to take him, to erase him from existence. But he refused to let go. Not now. Not after everything. The gemstone in his hand flared once more, its light searing his skin, but Michael gritted his teeth and raised it high. The walls of the room seemed to press in on him, but he didn't care. With every ounce of strength he had left, he hurled the gemstone toward the altar, toward the heart of solitude itself. There was a deafening crack, followed by an explosion of light. And then, silence. The world around Michael spun wildly as he lost all sense of direction. The explosion of light, the deafening crack, left his ears ringing, and his vision was a kaleidoscope of bright flashes and dark shadows. The ground beneath him trembled violently, and for a moment, he thought the very earth itself might tear apart. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one harder than the last. His body, exhausted and worn, felt like it was no longer his own. He stumbled forward, but the air around him felt thick, oppressive. It was as if the very atmosphere of solitude had turned into a prison, suffocating him, pulling him back toward its dark embrace. He couldn't stop now. He couldn't let it win. The echoes of the explosion faded, and the world around him began to settle. Slowly, the oppressive weight of solitude seemed to lift, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something was missing. The town, once alive with its strange, peaceful energy, now felt empty. It was as though it had been drained of its very essence. The silence that filled the air was deafening. The streets, usually so perfectly silent, were now devoid of their familiar rhythm. The people of Solitude were gone. It was only then that Michael realized the truth. He had broken it. Or at least he had begun to. The peace that Solitude had offered, had forced on its residents, that deep, suffocating calm, was gone. But in its place, there was nothing. A void. An absence of everything that had once defined the town. And as the world around him began to settle, he realized something far more terrifying. The emptiness wasn't just in the town. It was inside of him. Michael staggered forward, his body trembling. The gemstone he had thrown was gone, vanished into the void of the altar. And yet, the sense of peace, of belonging, that had gripped him before was now absent. He didn't know how long he had been in the town, how long he had been fighting against it. But now, he didn't know who he was anymore. His memories felt distant, like old dreams fading from his mind. His past, his life before Solitude, felt like it was slipping away from him. He could barely remember why he had come here. His name, his purpose, it all seemed distant, like the echo of a life he no longer belonged to. Michael! The voice came again, faint but clear. Mrs. Porter. He turned around, but there was no one there. Just the empty streets, the empty town, and the crushing silence. Michael! It was closer now. Her voice was clearer, more insistent, and yet, it carried a sense of finality. He could feel her presence behind him, just beyond his reach, but when he turned, he saw nothing but the desolate streets stretching before him. I didn't want this, he whispered to the empty air, though his voice sounded distant, as if it were coming from someone else. I just wanted to leave. The silence answered him, its cold, oppressive weight pressing down on his chest. Then, slowly, a figure appeared in the distance, walking down the center of the street. It was Thomas. His tall, slender figure moving with that same calm, almost mechanical precision that Michael had seen before. He was dressed the same, his face expressionless, but somehow familiar. Michael could feel his breath catch in his throat as Thomas drew nearer. The fear that had once held him in a vice-like grip began to return, but something else was there too, something colder, more disconcerting. It was as if Michael had just realized that Thomas wasn't just a person, but an extension of Solitude itself, a manifestation of its will. You've broken it, Thomas said quietly, stopping a few paces in front of Michael. His voice was calm, as always, but there was a hollow quality to it, as if the life that had once been there had been drained away. You've shattered it. I had to, Michael said, though his voice cracked with uncertainty. I had to stop it. I had to break free. Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around the empty streets, his eyes lingering on the silent buildings, the empty town. You've freed the town, Michael, he said finally, his voice filled with something resembling sadness. But what you don't understand is that Solitude was never about keeping people here. It was about protecting them from the noise of the world, from themselves, from you. Michael recoiled, taking a step back. What do you mean? Thomas's face remained unchanged. When you broke the gemstone, you didn't just destroy Solitude's power, you broke the town itself. You broke the peace. And now, the town is gone. But the people, what's left of them, they are no longer a part of it. Michael's mind reeled. But they're free. They're not trapped anymore. Thomas's eyes darkened, his gaze heavy. They are empty, Michael. They have no memories, no purpose. They were all bound to Solitude, their lives erased, their identities lost. Now, with the peace gone, they are nothing. They wander, lost to the void. And so will you. You were never meant to escape. No, Michael said, shaking his head, his voice rising in panic. No, I can't be like them. I won't be like them. Thomas took a step forward, his eyes steady, his voice like an unshakable force. You've already begun, Michael. The town may be gone, but what it left behind will never leave you. Solitude is in you now. It's in your soul. Michael staggered back, his breath shallow, his chest tightening. I didn't want this. I just wanted to be free. You wanted peace, Thomas said softly, his voice almost a whisper. And now you've become a part of it. The peace is within you, Michael. It's in your bones. You're already part of Solitude. It will never let you go. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He staggered, his vision swimming as the weight of Thomas's words settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He had tried so hard to escape, but in the end, there was no escaping Solitude. There was no leaving it. Because Solitude wasn't just a town. It was the absence of everything. It was the peace that took everything from you, the peace that left you with nothing. And Michael realized, with a sickening clarity, that he had never truly left Solitude at all. Michael stood there, frozen in place, as Thomas's words reverberated in his mind. Solitude is in you now. The finality of it hit him harder than the explosion of light had. His body felt like it was being crushed under the weight of those words, a weight that seemed to echo through every part of him. The emptiness around him had started to seep into his very being, hollowing him out in a way he hadn't anticipated. The air felt cold, but not in a way that numbed his skin. It was colder, colder in his chest, in his heart. He could feel it, that absence, like a hollow space inside of him where all his desires, his memories, and his very self once existed. The town had vanished, but it felt as if the vacuum left behind was swallowing him whole. Why? Michael whispered, his voice shaking. Why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? Thomas's expression remained unchanged, his eyes dark and distant. What truth, Michael? That Solitude wasn't meant to trap you? That it wasn't a prison, but a sanctuary? A sanctuary? Michael choked out. You turned us all into empty shells. People can't live like that. They can't live with nothing. People don't live like that, Michael, Thomas replied, his voice slow and deliberate. They become something else. Solitude didn't erase them. It filled them. It gave them peace. It gave them a purpose that they had never known before. But it was a lie, Michael said, his voice rising in defiance. It was all just a lie. You didn't give people peace. You gave them emptiness. You took everything from them, from me, and replaced it with nothing. That's the price of peace, Michael, Thomas said calmly, stepping closer. When you break free of all the noise, the chaos, the distractions of the outside world, you find something more. You find what's real. Michael stepped back, shaking his head. No, you took everything from them. You took their lives. And you took it all away when you destroyed the heart of Solitude, Thomas countered. Now, look around you. Do you see anyone left? Do you see anyone who can still feel? Michael turned, his gaze sweeping over the empty streets. The silence was deafening. The buildings stood like tombstones, vacant and still. He couldn't feel the pull anymore, the magnetic force that had once drawn him to the town, that invisible thread connecting him to everyone around him. It was all gone. The people were gone. And now, as he looked at the empty, lifeless town, he realized that there was nothing left to hold on to. He was alone. The realization slammed into him like a tidal wave. He wasn't part of Solitude anymore. No, not even that. He was beyond it. He had severed the last tie that connected him to the town. And now, he was left with nothing. No identity. No purpose. No memories of his past life. He had tried so hard to break free. But in doing so, he had destroyed everything that had once given him meaning. He was nothing. Michael collapsed to his knees, the weight of his own thoughts pressing down on him like 100 tons. His hands trembled as he pressed them against his face, his breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. The emptiness in his chest seemed to grow, spreading outward until it consumed every inch of him. He could still hear the whispers, though. Soft, distant voices, like fragments of a dream, calling to him from somewhere deep inside. But now, they sounded hollow, like echoes bouncing off the walls of an abandoned house. Michael! It was Mrs. Porter's voice again, but this time it wasn't comforting. It wasn't laced with the same false warmth it had once had. It was cold, distant, just like everything else in this broken world. Please, he whispered, but the words came out as nothing more than a plea. He wasn't even sure what he was asking for anymore. He just wanted it to stop. The pain, the emptiness, the loneliness. You chose this, Thomas's voice cut through the fog, sharp and unforgiving. You destroyed it. You took the town, its people, its peace, and now look at what you've done. You've broken everything, Michael. The words stung, but there was no denying their truth. Solitude had been a lie, yes, but it had also been something more. The town had offered peace, even if it was a peace built on the foundations of control, of erasure. The people had been empty shells, but at least they had been together. Now, there was nothing. Not even the peace that had once held everything together. The silence stretched on, growing unbearable, until Michael couldn't stand it any longer. He stood shakily, his body still unsteady, and turned toward the center of the town. The place that had once been a bustling square, filled with life, with laughter, now stood as a barren wasteland. His chest tightened with a deep, soul-crushing emptiness, and he knew. He knew there was no coming back. Solitude had claimed him. It had claimed all of them. And no matter how hard he fought, no matter how much he tried to resist, he had already become a part of it. His breath hitched, and for the first time since he had arrived, he allowed the tears to come. Silent and heavy, they slipped down his face as he gazed at the wreckage he had left behind. He had destroyed Solitude, but in doing so, he had destroyed himself. There was nothing left now. No escape. No way forward. No way back. Michael was truly alone. Michael stood in the heart of Solitude, his mind reeling from the weight of everything he had done. The empty streets stretched out before him like a labyrinth, a broken town with no pulse, no rhythm, no purpose. The silence felt suffocating, oppressive, a constant reminder of what he had shattered. He had thought that destroying the gemstone would set him free, but now, with the town in ruins, he realized the terrible truth. There was no escape from Solitude. There never had been. The tears on his face had long since dried, leaving only the raw, empty feeling of loss. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt whole, the last time he had felt like a person, not just a hollow shell drifting through an empty world. His body moved on instinct, but his mind was lost. He was a part of Solitude now, just as much as the town had once been a part of him. In the distance, he saw a figure approaching. It was Mrs. Porter, walking slowly down the middle of the street, her silhouette framed by the eerie light of a dying town. Her face was expressionless, her eyes distant. She didn't look like the woman who had welcomed him into Solitude, or the one who had gently tried to guide him into peace. She looked different, empty, like everyone else. "Michael," she said softly when she reached him, her voice a faint echo, hollow, as if it came from somewhere far away. "You've done it." He didn't reply. He couldn't. What was there to say? He had broken Solitude. He had broken everything. "Do you understand now?" Mrs. Porter continued, her words slow and deliberate, as though she was speaking to a child, or perhaps to herself. "You didn't just destroy the peace. You destroyed the balance, the harmony. Solitude wasn't a trap, Michael. It was a sanctuary, a place where people found the only thing worth having, freedom from the chaos of the world outside. And you took that away." Michael shook his head, his voice hoarse. "No, it wasn't peace. It was an illusion. It was a cage." Mrs. Porter's eyes softened, but there was no warmth in them. Just the same cold, unfeeling gaze that had come to define the town. "You see it as a cage, Michael, because you didn't understand it. You never understood that peace comes at a cost. It's the price we pay for safety, for freedom from the noise. When you broke Solitude, you didn't just break its walls. You shattered its very soul." Michael stepped back, his legs weak beneath him. The truth of her words pierced through him, and he wanted to scream, to fight back against the helplessness that threatened to swallow him whole. He had tried so hard to be free, to escape the grip of the town, but now, all that was left was the hollow feeling of regret. I thought I was saving them," he whispered. "I thought I was freeing them." Mrs. Porter's expression darkened, but her voice remained calm. "You thought you were saving them, but all you've done is set them adrift. You didn't free anyone, Michael. You destroyed everything they were. And now, there's nothing left but the void." The silence around them seemed to stretch on forever. Michael looked around at the empty streets, the dark windows of the houses that once stood full of life. The trees, once vibrant and full of movement, now stood still, frozen in time. There was no sound, no movement, nothing. Solitude was gone. "Why?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you let me do it? Why didn't you stop me?" Mrs. Porter's gaze softened, but it wasn't out of sympathy. It was the look of someone who had known all along what was going to happen. "Because you needed to understand. You needed to see the truth. You needed to see that you can't escape peace. It is what sustains everything. It's what holds us together. And without it, there's nothing but the emptiness, the void." The weight of her words crushed Michael's spirit. He had thought he was fighting for freedom, for something real. But now, standing in the ruins of Solitude, he realized that what he had destroyed wasn't just the town, it was everything that had once given him meaning. And in doing so, he had become just as empty as the world around him. "I never wanted this," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "No," Mrs. Porter said softly, almost with a note of sadness. "You didn't. But now you must live with it. You will live with it, just as all those who broke the peace before you have. You will never leave, Michael." Because Solitude, it's you. The ground beneath him trembled again, but this time, it wasn't the violent shaking that had preceded the explosion. It was a low, persistent hum, a vibration in the air that seemed to pulse through every part of his body. It was the town, still alive, still holding on to him, trying to draw him back into its embrace. He could feel it, could feel the power of the town slipping into him like a dark river, flowing through his veins. And then, in a moment of chilling clarity, he realized the truth. Solitude had never been about peace. It had never been about the people. It had always been about control. It had always been about creating something so perfect, so serene, that no one would ever question it. And once it had them, once it had consumed them, it held them in its grasp, until they became part of it. And now, Michael was part of it too. He wasn't free. He wasn't even close to being free. Solitude had claimed him, had claimed them all, and there was no escaping its grip. "Help us," Michael begged, his voice breaking as he looked at Mrs. Porter, his mind spiraling. "Help me, please." But she didn't answer. She simply stared at him with those hollow, knowing eyes, and Michael realized there was nothing left. There was no salvation, no escape. Solitude wasn't just a town. It was a cycle, a force. And now, Michael had become one with it. He was part of its endless, silent void. Time felt distorted now. It wasn't that time had stopped. It was that it no longer mattered. The sky above Solitude was still, a dim expanse of fading gray, as if the heavens themselves had long since abandoned the town. There was no sunlight, no moonlight, just an empty canvas stretched across the world, echoing the emptiness of the town beneath it. The streets, the houses, the trees, everything was frozen, still, as though the entire town had been suspended in time, caught between moments. Michael stood at the center of it all, feeling the weight of the silence press down on him. His body felt heavier than it had before. He could no longer escape it. The pulse of the town, that distant hum, had become part of him, threading its way into his bones, his very soul. It was as if Solitude had consumed him, absorbed him into its core. And there was nothing left. No escape. No more fighting. The empty streets stretched endlessly, but it no longer mattered which way he walked. He had no destination, no purpose. As he wandered through the lifeless town, his mind couldn't help but replay the words Mrs. Porter had spoken. "Solitude is you." It echoed through him, like a drumbeat, the constant reminder that he was no longer separate from the town. He had never truly left. He had become a part of it. Michael stumbled, falling against the side of a building. His hands trembled as he placed them on the cold stone. The emptiness in his chest felt hollow, as if he were no longer himself but a mere echo of what he had once been. There had been a time, a long time ago, when he had thought of himself as someone with a purpose, someone with desires and dreams. But now, he wasn't even sure who he was. Was he Michael Harper? Was he the man who had tried to escape, who had fought against the town? Or was he something else entirely, something shaped by solitude, just like everyone else? His heart ached with the void left inside of him, but even that pain felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. Solitude had stripped him of everything, his memories, his desires, his sense of self. He wasn't sure if he would ever be able to feel again. As he walked through the streets, his footsteps barely making a sound on the cracked pavement, he saw something. No, someone, standing in the distance. It was a woman, her silhouette barely visible against the fog that had begun to roll in. She was dressed in the same tattered clothing that all the people of Solitude had worn before the peace had been shattered. It was her. Michael's heart stopped for a moment. He knew that face. He knew her from somewhere. Her features were familiar, but distant, like a memory that refused to surface. She was standing perfectly still, just like the rest of the town, but there was something different about her. Something that drew him in. He walked toward her, his legs feeling heavy, but his mind racing. He had to know. He had to understand. What was she doing here? Why had she appeared now, when everything was supposed to be lost? As he got closer, she slowly turned toward him. Her face was pale, her eyes blank. There was no recognition in her gaze. She was empty, just like the rest of them. But then she spoke. "Why are you still here?" Her voice was faint, almost a whisper, but it carried an eerie weight. Her lips didn't move much, but the words seemed to float in the air around them. Michael froze, his heart racing in his chest. He didn't know why, but something about the question sent a cold shiver through him. What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. The woman didn't answer immediately. She just stared at him, her eyes hollow and lifeless, as though she could see through him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice barely audible. Solitude takes what it needs. It takes everything. And you were never meant to leave. Michael's throat went dry as the weight of her words sank in. Never meant to leave. That's what Mrs. Porter had said too. He had fought against it, tried to break free, but the town had claimed him, just like it claimed everyone else. He wasn't just part of Solitude, he was Solitude. He was the peace, the emptiness, the nothingness that defined the town. He had destroyed it, and in doing so, he had destroyed himself. Please, he whispered, his voice trembling. I just want to feel again. I want to be real again. The woman's lips barely moved as she spoke again. You are real, Michael, but you will never be the same. Solitude has taken you, and it has taken everything from you. You have no past. You have no future. You are the void. The words sank in like a dagger. Michael staggered backward, his head spinning, his vision swimming. This wasn't the life he had imagined. This wasn't what he had fought for. He had wanted freedom. He had wanted escape. But in breaking Solitude, he had shattered more than just the town. He had shattered his own existence. The woman faded into the fog, her figure dissolving like smoke in the air. The silence closed in on him once again, suffocating him, pressing down on him with unbearable force. And Michael knew, deep down, that there was no way out. There never had been. He was Solitude now. He was the silence, the emptiness, the void. There would be no escape, no second chance. And so, Michael walked, slowly, aimlessly, through the broken streets of the town that had once been his prison, but now was his only home. The town remained as it always had been, silent, frozen in time. But now, Michael walked through it with a sense of awareness he hadn't had before. Every step he took felt like a reminder of his place within the town, the weight of Solitude pressing on him, inside him, as though it had seeped into his very bones. He was part of it now. The peace, the emptiness, it was all inside him. He wandered through the streets, his steps aimless, his mind adrift in the fog of his thoughts. His surroundings were familiar, yet they felt alien, distorted. The buildings that had once felt like walls trapping him now seemed hollow and lifeless. The windows, once dark, now reflected his image back at him, distorted and strange. He barely recognized the person in the glass. Who was he? Was he even Michael Harper anymore? Was there anything left of the man he had been before he had come to Solitude? He passed by houses that once seemed full of people, full of life, but now they stood empty, as hollow as the rest of the town. There were no faces in the windows, no whispers of voices. There was nothing. Not anymore. The residents of Solitude, whoever they had been, were gone. All that was left were empty shells. And Michael had become just like them. He thought about what Mrs. Porter had said, what Thomas had said. Solitude takes what it needs. He had thought he could break it. He had thought he could escape it. But in the end, he had become Solitude. He had become the emptiness, the peace that had once seemed so alluring. Now it was all that remained. A cold, quiet void that filled him, defined him, and would never leave. His heart felt like it was slowly being consumed by the silence. The more he moved through the town, the more he felt it take over. The peace, once a comfort, now felt like a weight he could not escape. It was as though the very town had reached into his soul and erased everything that had once made him human. He stopped in front of the clock tower in the center of the town square, the symbol of Solitude that had stood silent and unmoving for as long as he could remember. The hands of the clock were frozen at midnight, just as they had been before he had tried to break free. The town had no past, no future. It existed in this eternal, unchanging moment, trapped in the emptiness of its own peace. Michael reached out and touched the stone base of the tower. It was cold, unyielding. As his fingers brushed against it, he could feel the pulse of Solitude beneath the surface. It was still there, deep within the heart of the town, still alive, still powerful. He had thought he had destroyed it, but it was not gone. It was a part of him now. He could feel it in his chest, a constant presence, a weight he could never escape. He had fought against it. He had tried to break free. But in doing so, he had become part of it. Solitude had consumed him, and now he was nothing but an echo of the man he once was. The peace that he had once fought so hard to reject had become his prison, his identity, his eternity. He dropped his hand from the tower and turned to face the square. The fog had thickened, enveloping the town in a heavy, choking haze. The streets stretched out before him, but he no longer saw them as paths to escape. They were simply the roads of a place where nothing moved, where nothing ever changed. He had tried to run, to break free, but now he understood. There was no running from Solitude. There was only existence within it. And that was his reality now. Michael looked around, but there was no one there. Not anymore. The town had claimed its final toll, and everyone who had once walked its streets, who had once lived in the town, had been lost. The peace that had defined Solitude had been shattered, but it wasn't the people who were affected. It was Michael. He had broken the town, but in doing so, he had destroyed himself. He was the last one left, and he was no different from the empty shells that had once inhabited this place. He was nothing. He walked slowly through the square, the fog swirling around his feet. There was no longer any urgency in his movements, no desire to escape. His fight had ended. The town had claimed him, and now there was no going back. He had tried to fight, tried to break free, but it was futile. Solitude had already won. As he walked, the sound of his footsteps was the only thing that broke the silence, a soft echo in the emptiness. He had no destination. He had no future. There was only the eternal now. The peace that he had once rejected, the emptiness that had once terrified him, had become his reality. It was all that remained. And so he walked, his mind empty, his body tired, through the streets of Solitude, a town that no longer existed but still lived within him. A town that had consumed him, and now, there was nothing left but the endless silence. The fog thickened, swirling like a living thing around Michael, but he didn't mind. It was the kind of fog that had no end, no beginning, just a constant presence. He had stopped trying to fight it a long time ago. The air felt stagnant, heavy with the weight of memories that no longer belonged to him. His body moved through the streets of Solitude like a ghost, his steps echoing in the empty square. The town had no heartbeat, no pulse, no sense of life. It simply existed, trapped in the perpetual quiet of its own making. There were no more faces, no more voices. And yet, Michael still walked. What else was there to do? What else was there to feel? He was trapped in a state of being neither alive nor dead, caught in the stillness of Solitude. He had once fought against it with every ounce of his being, desperate to escape its grip. But now, as he wandered through the hollow streets, he realized something terrifying. He was Solitude. The thought echoed in his mind, again and again. He had become the very thing he had sought to escape, the very emptiness he had fought against. There was no other existence for him now. Solitude wasn't just a town, it was a state of being. A prison of peace and silence, where time had no meaning and nothing could ever change. He had torn the town apart, but in doing so, he had woven himself into its fabric. He stopped in front of one of the old houses, its windows dark and still. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting him to step inside. But he didn't move. He didn't need to. The house was empty. It had always been empty. Every house, every building, every square inch of Solitude was empty, because no one had ever truly lived here. Not in the way that mattered. Not in the way that could bring change. The town had been built on a lie that promised peace but demanded a soul in return. And now, Michael was the last soul left. But even he didn't feel like he existed. He was just a shadow, a memory that had slipped through the cracks, forgotten and abandoned. He closed his eyes, but even in the darkness of his own mind, he couldn't escape the silence. It was everywhere, inside him, around him, beyond him. It was the only thing that remained, and it was all-encompassing. He tried to remember what it was like to feel, to think, to want something more than just the void. But those memories, too, felt distant, faded. Solitude had erased everything. His past, his future, his very identity. He was part of the town now. He was the echo of a place that never truly existed in the first place. He was both the observer and the observed. He was both the ghost and the living. There was nothing left to be but this endless, unchanging silence. But still, he moved. Still, he walked. There was no other option. There was nothing left to fight, nothing left to fight for. He had tried to break free, but now as he stood in the middle of the lifeless square, he understood the truth. There was no freedom in Solitude. No release. No escape. There was only the silence. Only the emptiness. He had been given peace, but at the cost of everything else. His mind, his heart, his soul, they were all just echoes now. They no longer mattered. His footsteps continued to reverberate off the empty buildings, the sound of his movement filling the void. But it didn't feel like he was going anywhere. It didn't feel like he was moving at all. He was just there. There was no purpose in it, no meaning. And yet, as he walked, as the fog continued to swirl around him, he felt something stir within him, a flicker of recognition, a trace of something that had once been a part of him, a memory, a desire. He didn't know what it was or where it came from, but for a brief moment, the silence cracked. A sliver of something real slipped through. But it was fleeting. It was gone before he could grasp it. And still, he walked. The town had claimed him, and now it had become his only existence. The silence was complete. The stillness was eternal. There was nothing more to do but walk through it, step by step, forever. He was Solitude, and Solitude was him. Michael walked. It was all he could do now. The fog had thickened around him, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness, but he kept moving forward, one foot after the other. There was nowhere to go, no place to reach. The town, once so familiar, now felt like a series of endless, unchanging loops, a maze with no exit. He passed through the same streets, saw the same empty houses, the same vacant windows. And yet, nothing changed. Nothing would ever change. He had no direction, no purpose. There was no one to speak to, no one to see. The town was a reflection of himself now, empty, silent, lifeless. And even though he felt as though he were moving, deep down, he knew it didn't matter. His body might be walking, but his mind was still, locked in place, caught in the silence that had overtaken Solitude. He didn't know how long it had been since he had tried to break free. Time had stopped in the moment he shattered the heart of the town. It wasn't just the clock that had stopped, it was everything. He had thought he could escape, that he could run from the grip Solitude had on him. But now, he knew the truth. There was no escape. Not now. Not ever. He passed the town square again, the same empty space where people had once gathered, where life had once hummed. But now, it was just an empty shell. The clock tower stood frozen, its hands stuck at midnight, the symbol of a time that had never moved, a place where nothing ever changed. He stopped at the base of the tower and looked up at its cracked face. He could feel the weight of the stillness pressing on him, the heaviness of the town's absence. It was as if Solitude had consumed all that had once been, leaving only this endless, aching void. There was no sound. No birds in the trees, no wind in the air, no voices in the streets. Just silence. Silence that stretched on forever. For a long time, Michael stood there, staring at the clock, unable to look away. He had tried to break it, to destroy it, to tear it down. But now, in the emptiness of the town, he realized that it was never really Solitude that had trapped him. It was the silence. The quiet, endless stillness that had consumed everything. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. And for the first time, he allowed himself to truly feel the silence, to listen to the emptiness that filled every corner of his being. He had been fighting against it, trying to escape it, but now he understood. This was his punishment. This was his fate. The peace that Solitude offered was never freedom. It was a trap, a lie wrapped in comfort. It promised peace, but it took away everything that made him human. It took away his memories, his desires, his will. It left him with nothing but the silence, the stillness, and the emptiness. And now, he was nothing. No longer a man, no longer a person. Just a shadow, walking through the ruins of a town that had never been real. He had destroyed the heart of Solitude, but in doing so, he had destroyed himself. There was no redemption, no escape, no way back. There was only the endless walk through the empty streets, the constant reminder that he had become one with the town. He had once thought he could fight it, that he could resist its pull. But now he knew. The town didn't take anything from him. It simply removed the things that didn't belong. His past, his future, his very self, and left only the quiet, the peace, the void. He had wanted to be free, but freedom was never an option. Not in Solitude. Not in this place. Because Solitude wasn't a town. It was an idea, a force, a place where everything was still, where nothing ever changed. And once it had you, it didn't let go. Michael opened his eyes and looked around once more, at the same empty streets, the same vacant houses. He could feel the pull of the silence surrounding him, suffocating him, and for the first time since he had arrived, he understood what it meant to be truly lost. There was no more hope, no more fight, no more will. There was only Solitude, and he had become a part of it. He turned away from the clock tower and walked into the fog, his footsteps the only sound in the emptiness. He had no destination. He had no purpose. There was nothing left, only the road ahead, and the road would never end. The fog had deepened. The air felt colder, heavier. Michael continued to walk, as he had done for what seemed like eternity. The streets of Solitude stretched on before him, indistinguishable from one another. The town was so perfect in its stillness that it became impossible to tell where one street ended and another began. It was all the same, empty, lifeless, silent. He didn't remember how long he had been walking. Hours, days, years. Time had ceased to matter long ago. He didn't even know what he was searching for anymore. He had wandered through the town for so long, through the fog, through the endless repetition of the same scenes, that his body had become numb to the cold and his mind had become numb to the silence. At times, he wondered if he was even walking at all, or if he was simply trapped in a dream, one that repeated endlessly, the same steps over and over, never leading anywhere. He had tried to escape. He had fought. But now, the realization had fully settled into his bones. There was no escaping solitude. Not because it was a physical prison, but because it was a state of being, a place that was not bound by time or space. It was in him now. He was Solitude. He had become a part of its never-ending cycle. His body felt like a vessel, hollow and aching, carrying only the weight of his own failure. He had tried to resist the pull, but now he understood. Resistance wasn't possible. Solitude didn't imprison the body. It consumed the spirit. It erased everything that had once made a person human, their desires, their memories, their purpose, and left only the quiet. The endless, suffocating quiet. He stopped in front of an old, crumbling building. He had passed it countless times, but it felt different now, as though it were calling to him, beckoning him forward. Michael reached out, his fingers brushing the door. It creaked open, the sound harsh in the silence. Inside, the room was dark. There was nothing here, no furniture, no people, just shadows. But in the center of the room, something caught his eye. A faint light flickered, like a distant star trying to break through the fog. It was a mirror. An old, cracked mirror that hung against the wall. Michael didn't know why, but he was drawn to it, as though it held the answers he had been searching for. He stepped closer, his reflection barely visible in the cracked surface, distorted and fragmented. But as he stared into it, the reflection shifted. For a moment, it wasn't just his face looking back at him. He saw others, figures from his past, faces that had once been familiar but were now distant, like memories long forgotten. They were the people he had known before solitude had consumed him, before everything had been erased. He saw the faces of his family, his friends, his life as it once had been. But the faces weren't clear. They were fading, shifting, like phantoms in the fog, their features blurred and indistinct. The more he looked, the more they seemed to dissolve, fading into the darkness of the mirror. "Why?" Michael whispered, his voice shaking. "Why can't I remember?" The reflection rippled, and for the briefest of moments, he saw himself, the real him. Not the hollow version that had been walking the streets of solitude, not the empty shell that had lost everything, but the person he had once been. He was standing in front of the mirror, looking at himself. Alive. Whole. The image flickered again, and suddenly, the reflection wasn't just his face. It was the faces of the people of solitude, blank, emotionless, their eyes empty. They stood in the mirror, staring back at him, and Michael realized the horrifying truth. He wasn't alone. He never had been. The people of solitude were all here, all around him. He had always been a part of them, trapped in the same endless cycle. They weren't gone. They were still here, just like him, stuck in the same eternal silence. They had never left, and neither would he. The mirror's surface rippled again, and Michael's own reflection stared back at him, not with the hollow, vacant eyes of the man who had wandered the streets of solitude, but with something darker. A faint smile curled on his lips, but it was empty, empty like the town itself. "You can't escape, Michael," the reflection whispered. "You never could." The words sent a chill through him. He turned away from the mirror, but the silence followed him. It always followed him. No matter where he went, no matter how many times he walked through the same streets, the silence remained. He was part of it now. He had become one with the town, with the people who had once lived here. There was no escape from solitude. Not for him, and not for anyone else. Michael collapsed to his knees in the empty room, his hands trembling as he tried to grasp at the remnants of his past, the fragments of memories that were slipping through his fingers like sand. He had wanted to be free. He had wanted to break the cycle. But now, in the stillness of the room, he understood the truth. Solitude wasn't a place you escaped from. It was a place you became. And there was no way out. Michael stood in the darkness, the fog swirling around him like a living thing. It clung to his skin, seeping into his bones, making everything feel cold and distant. His breath came in shallow gasps, but it felt as though he was not truly breathing at all. He was in a place that didn't quite exist, yet somehow it did. A place where time had no meaning and nothing changed. He had once tried to escape. Once, he had fought with everything he had to break free from the grip of solitude. But now, standing here, amidst the ruins of a town that had long since ceased to live, he understood the truth. There was no escape. There never had been. Solitude wasn't a place you left. It was a state of being. The fog parted slightly, and for a moment, the faint outline of the clock tower appeared, its hands still frozen at midnight. It was the same as it had always been, unmoving, untouchable. The symbol of the town, of Solitude itself. The clock had no power to change, no purpose except to mark the passage of time that no longer mattered. Michael had long since stopped wondering why he was still here. The question felt irrelevant now. Everything he had fought for, every shred of hope he had clung to, was gone. Solitude had taken it all, piece by piece, until nothing remained but the silence, the emptiness. And yet, as he stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still searching for something. Something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was an answer. Maybe it was a way out. But the longer he thought about it, the more he realized that the answer wasn't outside of him. It was inside. Solitude had never been just a town. It had never been just a place. It was a reflection of his own mind, his own soul. He had become a part of it because he had been part of it all along. Solitude was the absence of everything, the absence of noise, of chaos, of meaning, and it was that absence that had drawn him in. It had promised peace, and it had delivered. But it had also taken everything else. His memories, his emotions, his very identity. All of it was gone, replaced by the stillness that defined the town. For a long time, he had believed that he could escape, that there was some way to break free from the peace that had consumed him. But now he knew. He had never been separate from it. He had always been part of it. And the peace he had tried to destroy had only reflected the emptiness he had carried inside of himself. He took a step forward, feeling the weight of eternity press down on him. The town stretched before him, empty, unchanging. There was no direction to go, no place to reach. The streets were silent, the houses were vacant, and the fog continued to swirl around him, thick and unyielding. Everything was the same, and it would always be the same. The realization hit him with the force of a wave crashing against the shore. He wasn't stuck in solitude. He was Solitude. The town had been his creation, his reflection, his very essence. The people who had once lived here were gone because they had never been real. They had been extensions of him, projections of his own emptiness. And now, he was the last one left. The last part of the cycle. Michael's legs gave way, and he sank to his knees in the center of the empty square, his hands gripping the cold stone beneath him. The weight of it all was too much to bear. He had wanted freedom. He had wanted to escape. But now, he saw that freedom was just another illusion. There was no escape from solitude. There was no release. There was only the endless cycle of the town, the never-ending loop of silence and peace that he had tried so hard to break. He closed his eyes, but the silence was still there. It was all around him. It was in his bones, in his blood, in his very soul. He could feel it, wrapping around him like an invisible shroud, tightening with every breath he took. In the stillness, he heard something. A voice. It wasn't his own. It was faint, distant, but it was there. Michael. He opened his eyes, but there was no one there. Only the empty town, the fog, the endless silence. The voice spoke again. You wanted peace. Michael shook his head, his breath ragged. No, I didn't want peace. I wanted freedom. Freedom from what? The voice asked. You were always free, Michael. You just didn't know it. The words echoed through him, resonating deep inside, and for the first time, he understood. He had never been trapped in solitude. He had never been trapped at all. He had created it, just as he had created his own emptiness. Solitude wasn't just a place. It was a reflection of his own mind, his own heart. And now, it was all he had left. He was not trapped in the town. He was trapped in himself. The fog swirled around him, and Michael realized that he wasn't alone. He wasn't the only one who had wandered these streets. The people of Solitude were still here. They had never left. They had never been anywhere else. They were a part of him, just as he was a part of them. And together, they walked through the endless silence, the endless peace. But now, Michael understood. There was no escape. There was no end. Solitude was the cycle, the eternal loop of peace and emptiness, and he had become its last prisoner. His mind, his heart, his very soul had merged with the town, and there was no returning to the world he had once known. There was only the silence. The eternal silence. The silence was unbearable. It clung to Michael like a weight, pressing against his chest, filling his every breath with a suffocating knowledge that there was no escape. No more struggling. No more hope. Just the quiet, the unbroken stillness, wrapping itself around him, inescapable and constant. He had been walking for what seemed like an eternity, but his steps were mechanical now, as though his legs moved without any will or purpose behind them. His body had long since stopped feeling like his own. There was no sense of time here, no sense of change. Every street, every square, every house was exactly the same as it had been when he first arrived. The fog remained thick, blocking out any trace of light, leaving only the oppressive darkness of an endless night. He passed through the town without thinking, the same empty buildings standing like silent sentinels on either side. He no longer noticed the cracks in the stone, or the way the air felt colder than it used to. The town was frozen, and so was he. There was nothing to move him anymore. And then, as he walked through the empty square once again, something shifted. A subtle change, almost imperceptible at first, but it made him stop in his tracks. He turned his head, the faintest sense of recognition stirring in him, though he couldn't place what it was. He had walked through this square countless times, but today it felt different. It felt new. The fog seemed to part, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the clock tower loomed above him, its hands still frozen at midnight. But now, as he looked at it, he felt something stir within him. A memory, faint but familiar. It was as if the stillness of the tower had called to something deep inside of him, some part of him that had been buried beneath the weight of solitude. Some part of him that hadn't been erased. His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to the base of the tower. His hand reached out, almost of its own accord, brushing against the cold stone. The touch was light, tentative, but the moment his fingers made contact, a jolt of energy shot through him, vibrating through his bones, reverberating through his mind. The world seemed to shift. For a split second, the fog around him seemed to dissipate. A thin sliver of light broke through, casting a glow across the stone, across the broken town. The clock tower, still frozen in time, suddenly seemed to pulse with life, and for the first time, Michael felt something stir inside him that wasn't the crushing weight of emptiness. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was there. He pulled his hand away from the tower, his breath catching in his throat. The fog didn't fully clear, but the feeling of stillness seemed to crack for just a moment. The light was faint, but it was real. And in that moment, something in him knew. He wasn't entirely gone. He had become a part of solitude, yes, but there was a part of him, deep down, that wasn't lost. A small part of him still existed beyond the town, beyond the peace, beyond the emptiness. A small part of him was still fighting. For the first time in what seemed like forever, Michael felt the faintest flicker of something other than silence. A memory, a feeling, a glimpse of who he had been before all of this began. He had lost so much. He had destroyed so much. But there was something in him still, something that refused to let go. He didn't know if it was enough to change anything, but it was enough to make him stand there, in the middle of the square, feeling the pulse of life, however faint, surge through him. His chest felt tight, but not from the usual suffocating weight of solitude. It was different. There was something new stirring in him, something he hadn't felt in what seemed like a lifetime. And then, in the distance, he heard it. A voice. It was distant at first, barely audible, like a whisper carried by the wind. But it was a voice he hadn't heard in a long time. He turned his head, straining to hear it. The voice was soft, almost too soft to catch, but it carried the faintest hint of warmth, of recognition. Michael! He froze. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound deafening in his ears. He turned toward the source of the voice, and for the briefest of moments, the fog seemed to clear. He could see someone, no, something, standing just beyond the square, on the edge of the road. It was a figure, vague and indistinct, but it was there. It was real. The voice came again, clearer this time. Michael! And in that moment, Michael understood. The voice wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a figment of his imagination. It was him. It was a part of him. A part of himself that had survived everything. A part of himself that had been buried beneath the weight of solitude, but had never been fully erased. He started toward the figure, each step hesitant, unsure if it was real, unsure if he was real. But the closer he got, the more the fog seemed to fade, the more the silence seemed to lift. For the first time in so long, he felt the weight of solitude begin to loosen its grip on him. The figure in the distance began to take shape. Slowly, surely. It was him. It was Michael. It was him from before. The man who had come to solitude. The man who had fought. The man who had once been whole. Michael! The voice was his own now, his voice, calling to him from within. He reached out, and for the first time in so long, he felt his own hand as it trembled, felt the weight of it. It was like touching something real again. Something that hadn't been lost. And just as he reached forward, the figure stepped toward him, and he saw it. It wasn't the same. It was a reflection, yes, but this was Michael reborn in some way, transformed by solitude. He was still here, he had never been fully gone. And in that moment, he realized that solitude, for all its suffocating grip, had never completely consumed him. It had only buried him. He could feel it, deep within him. He wasn't fully part of the town. He wasn't fully lost. The cycle wasn't over. Not yet. The fog seemed thinner now, lighter somehow, and Michael could feel it lifting as he took each step toward the figure in the distance. It was as though the very air around him was changing, slowly, but surely. The oppressive stillness that had once defined solitude seemed to be fading, just enough to let him breathe again. He could feel the pulse of life in his chest, faint but undeniable. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in what felt like lifetimes. As he walked, his eyes stayed locked on the figure that had called to him. His heart pounded in his chest as he drew closer. It was him. It was the real him, the man who had come to Solitude, who had tried to break free, who had fought against the town's insidious hold. It was the part of him he thought was lost forever. His feet moved faster now, driven by something stronger than the heaviness that had weighed him down for so long. The fog parted further as he reached the center of the square, where the figure awaited him, still and silent, standing in the light that now pierced through the haze. He stepped forward, and as he did, the town seemed to shift around him. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there, a subtle change in the way the world seemed to breathe. The broken buildings, the empty streets, the clock tower, everything felt different, somehow alive in a way that it hadn't before. As he reached the figure, the person turned to face him. It was a reflection of himself, yes, but it was also something more. His eyes, once empty, now glinted with a quiet strength. His expression was one he hadn't seen in ages, a look of determination, of purpose. It was as if the last remnants of his own spirit had been waiting for this moment, for him to remember who he truly was. The figure spoke. "Do you remember?" Michael opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His breath came in quick gasps, as if he were struggling to breathe in the real world again. The figure nodded, as if understanding the turmoil inside him. "You've forgotten, Michael," the figure said softly. "But now, you're starting to wake up." The words hit him like a shock. Wake up. How could he wake up when solitude had claimed him so completely? How could he remember when the silence had taken everything from him? "Solitude," Michael began, but his voice faltered. He wasn't sure what to say. It felt like trying to recall a distant dream, a memory that had been buried so deep he couldn't reach it. "Solitude didn't take everything," the figure interrupted, stepping closer. "It took what wasn't real, what didn't belong. But it couldn't take you, Michael. It never could." Michael's mind raced. "But I became solitude," he whispered. "I was part of it." The figure smiled, though it was a sad smile. "No, Michael, you weren't. You were always more than solitude. You were always a part of something bigger, something real. Solitude took what it needed, what it thought it needed, but it never took your will, your soul. Not entirely." Michael's chest tightened. He felt something stir within him, something small but powerful, like the first breath after being underwater for too long. It was hope. Hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel for so long. "You can't fight it forever," the figure continued. "The peace you tried to destroy, it was never meant to trap you. It was meant to teach you how to let go." "Let go," Michael repeated. The words felt foreign, almost painful, but there was something in them that resonated deep within him. Something that clicked. "Yes," the figure nodded again. "Let go of the fight. Let go of the need to control. Solitude was never your enemy. It was the silence you feared. But that silence was a gift. It's only when you stop fighting the quiet that you'll see the truth." Michael's heart raced as he absorbed the words, but they weren't enough. There was something missing, something he still didn't understand. "What truth?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The truth that solitude isn't just a place," the figure said. "It's a choice. It's a state of being. It's the space between the noise and the chaos. It's the moment when everything falls away, and all that's left is you. You don't need to fight it, Michael. You don't need to destroy it. You need to accept it." Michael stared at the figure, confusion still swirling in his mind. "Accept it. Accept solitude." The figure stepped forward, closer now, and placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "You've been fighting against yourself, Michael. Solitude is a part of you. It always has been. You were never trapped. You were just too afraid to see it." The words echoed in his mind over and over as the fog around him began to shift again, less dense now, thinner. For the first time, the air felt clearer, lighter. He breathed in deeply, and for the first time in so long, the emptiness didn't feel like it was consuming him. It felt like peace. Michael closed his eyes, letting the quiet seep into him, not as a force trying to break him, but as something natural. Something he had always needed. He had been running from it, resisting it, afraid of the silence, afraid of what it might mean. But now, as he stood there, feeling the weight of it wash over him, he understood. Solitude wasn't something to escape. It was something to embrace. He opened his eyes again. The figure was gone. The town, once so heavy, now felt almost weightless. The fog continued to recede, and the space around him felt open, infinite, like the world was breathing again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Michael felt truly alive. He wasn't part of the empty shell of solitude anymore. He wasn't a shadow of himself. He was free. He had broken the cycle, not by destroying, but by accepting. Solitude had never been a prison. It had been a place of peace. A place where the noise of the world could fade, leaving only the quiet truth of who he was. He smiled, the first real smile he had felt in so long. The road ahead was still uncertain. The town was still there, but it no longer held him captive. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time, he felt ready to find out. The silence no longer felt suffocating. It felt like a new beginning.